I only needed a hiding spot. I only needed 10 seconds of safety from the man who swore he would never let me leave him alive. So I grabbed the most dangerous-looking stranger on the sidewalk and kissed him. I thought he would push me away. I thought he would be angry. But then I felt his hand wrap around my waist like a vice. His grip didn't just hold me, it claimed me. He leaned into my ear, his voice as cold as the rain, and whispered, "You started this, and I am not letting go now." Ivy Claire stood in the shadows of the dark alley, her heart drumming against her ribs. She could hear Chad's voice echoing through the street. He was calling her name, but it wasn't a sweet call. It was a threat. Ivy was 30 years old, and she had spent 3 of those years trapped in Chad Miller's shadow. He was wealthy, handsome, and completely terrifying. Tonight, she had finally run. But as the headlights of Chad's car turned the corner, Ivy realized she was trapped. There was nowhere to hide. Except for the tall, dark-haired man standing by a black SUV just 10 feet away. He looked like power personified. Without thinking, Ivy stepped into his space, grabbed his expensive coat, and pressed her lips to his. If you love stories about strong women and powerful protectors, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. New stories every week. He thought he broke my heart, but he just handed me a crown. If you love a story where the villain treats her like a queen while her ex watches in regret, you're in the right place. Click the subscribe button. Killian Blackwood was a man of cold habits and even colder silences. At 42, he lived as the shadow king of the city. He didn't just own the tall glass buildings that touched the clouds, he owned the people inside them. Killian was used to the sound of boots echoing in empty hallways and the way people started to tremble the moment he walked into a room. He was used to powerful men begging for their lives or for one more chance. He was definitely not used to a beautiful woman with terrified eyes, grabbing his coat in the middle of a rainy sidewalk. The rain fell in heavy sheets, blurring the world into shades of gray. When Ivy's lips touched his, Killian's first instinct was to push her back. His body went stiff, and his eyes narrowed with a dangerous flash. But then he felt her shaking. It wasn't the chill of the rain, it was the deep, bone-deep shiver of someone who thought they were about to die. Over her shoulder, he saw it. A black car was crawling past the curb, moving like a shark in dark water. Inside, a man was scanning the sidewalk like a predator looking for its prey. Killian looked down at the woman held tight against his chest. She was stunning, her dark skin glowing under the orange hum of the streetlights. Her eyes were shut tight, her eyelashes wet with rain and tears. Something inside Killian's frozen heart shifted. It wasn't a soft feeling, but it was a feeling nonetheless. Instead of pushing her away, he wrapped his heavy arms around her and pulled her closer. He deepened the kiss, using his large frame to shield her body from the prying eyes in the car. He made them look like nothing more than 2 lovers lost in the storm. The seconds felt like hours. Finally, the engine of the black car roared and the tail lights faded into the fog. Ivy let out a shaky breath and tried to pull back, her hands pressing against his expensive suit. She was breathless, her chest heaving as she looked up at him in shock. But Killian's hand stayed firmly on her waist, his grip like iron. He wasn't ready to let go of the first thing that had made him feel alive in years. "You don't get to walk away after that," he rasped, his voice low and steady. "You started this, now you're coming with me." Ivy had always lived a quiet life. She was an artist who felt more at home with her paints and brushes than with other people. Her world used to be small and peaceful until Chad Miller forced his way into it. To everyone else, Chad was a perfect gentleman. He came from a wealthy Korean family and had a smile that could charm anyone. But to Ivy, that smile was a cage. He treated the world like his personal playground, and he decided Ivy was his favorite toy. She had no family left to protect her. Her parents were gone, leaving her alone in a city that felt too big. Even her best friend, Jade, couldn't help. Jade was too scared of Chad's power and the way his family could make people disappear from their jobs or their homes. Because of Chad, Ivy had become a ghost in her own life, hiding in the shadows and praying he wouldn't find her. Now, sitting in the back of a black SUV, the air felt different. The seats were made of soft leather, and the heater was hummed quietly against the chill of the rain. Killian didn't talk much. He just sat there, his dark eyes watching her every move. He reached over and handed her his coat. It was heavy and warm, smelling like expensive wood and the fresh scent of the storm. Ivy wrapped it around her shoulders, feeling smaller than ever inside the giant garment. "My name is Killian," he said. His voice was deep and steady, like the low rumble of thunder. "Ivy," she whispered back. Her voice was thin, but for the first time in a long time it didn't shake with fear. She had no idea who this man really was. She didn't know that Killian Blackwood was the head of the most feared organization in the entire country. She didn't know that men spoke his name in hushed tones or that he held the city in his palm. All she knew was the feeling of safety spreading through her chest. For the first time in 3 long years, she realized that Chad Miller couldn't reach her here. Behind the tinted windows of this car, protected by this silent giant, she was finally out of the predator's sight. Killian took Ivy to a place where he knew Chad could never find her. It was a massive estate hidden far away from the noisy city streets, tucked behind high stone walls that looked like they had stood for 100 years. As they stepped through the heavy front doors, the air inside was still and smelled of old books and polished wood. The hallway was so long that Ivy felt like she was walking into a castle from a storybook. A man named Williams stepped forward from the shadows of the foyer. Williams was Killian's right-hand man, and he was always dressed in a sharp gray suit that never had a single wrinkle. He had a very serious look in his eyes, like he was always looking for a problem to solve. When he saw Killian walking in with a woman, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. It was clear that Killian Blackwood did not usually bring guests home. "Sir," Williams asked, his voice full of questions he didn't dare to say out loud. Killian didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes moving across the room, checking every corner out of habit. "Set up the guest suite," Killian ordered, his voice echoing against the high ceilings. "And Williams, I need you to find out everything there is to know about a man named Chad Miller. I want his history, his money, and his secrets." Ivy felt a sudden chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She hugged Killian's oversized coat tighter around her body. "How did you know his name?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper in the large room. She hadn't mentioned Chad once since she jumped into Killian's arms on the sidewalk. Killian stopped walking and turned to face her. His face was as hard as stone, and his dark eyes were unreadable. "I saw the way you looked at that black car, Ivy," he said. "I saw the terror in your eyes, and I saw the predator behind the glass. I make it my business to know my enemies before they even know me." He stepped a bit closer, his shadow falling over her. "And since you chose to kiss me," he continued, his voice dropping to a low growl, "his enemies are now my enemies. You belong under my roof now." As the days passed in the quiet of the massive estate, Ivy began to see small cracks in Killian's hard armor. The man who ruled the city with an iron fist wasn't always as cold as he seemed. Late one night, unable to sleep, Ivy wandered into the library. The room was filled with the scent of old paper and leather. There, sitting in a high-backed chair, she found Killian. He wasn't working or giving orders. He was simply staring at a faded, old photograph of a man and a woman. "My parents," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. He didn't look up, but he knew she was there. He told her how they had been killed when he was just a boy, leaving him alone in a world that didn't care if he lived or died. He had been forced to build his empire out of nothing but grit and blood. He spoke about the hard choices he had made and how he had to become a monster just to survive the streets. "I wasn't born this way, Ivy," he said softly, his eyes still fixed on the photo. "But in my world, there are only 2 kinds of people. If you aren't the wolf, you are the sheep. I decided a long time ago that I would never be the sheep again." Ivy felt a tug in her chest. She walked over and slowly reached out, resting her hand on top of his. Her skin was warm against his cool touch. In that moment, she realized they weren't so different after all. Both of them had been shaped by deep pain. Both of them were hiding from a world that had tried to break them. She saw the boy he used to be, hidden underneath the expensive suits and the scary reputation. Killian looked up at her, and for a heartbeat, the Shadow King was gone. He wasn't a boss or a predator. He was just a man who wanted to be seen for who he truly was. He leaned forward, letting his forehead rest gently against hers. The air between them felt charged and heavy. "I told myself I would never have a weakness," he whispered, his breath brushing against her lips. "I spent my whole life making sure no one could hurt me, but you are making that very difficult, Ivy." The tension in the city grew as Chad Miller finally realized Ivy was gone. He was not a man who handled losing very well. To Chad, Ivy was a prize he had won, and he didn't just want her back. He wanted to destroy anyone who had helped her escape. He used his family's massive fortune to hire the best private investigators in the country. They swarmed the streets, asking questions and leaning on everyone Ivy had ever known. Chad eventually sent a terrifying message to Jade, Ivy's only friend. He threatened to ruin Jade's life and her family unless she told him exactly where Ivy was hiding. Later that afternoon, Ivy's phone buzzed on the nightstand. When she answered, she heard Jade crying so hard she could barely speak. "He's going to hurt me, Ivy. I'm so sorry, but he's everywhere." Jade sobbed into the phone. "He says if you don't show up at the big charity gala tonight, he's going to the police. He's telling them you stole a fortune from his family. He'll have you locked away forever." Ivy felt the walls of the beautiful estate closing in on her again. The old fear returned, making her heart race like a trapped bird. She didn't want to bring this trouble to Killian's doorstep or put him in any danger, but she couldn't sit by and let Jade suffer for her sake. She stood by the window, the phone trembling in her hand, feeling like she was back in the rain with no place to run. Killian walked into the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He took one look at her pale face and the phone in her hand and knew exactly what was happening. He stepped close, his presence filling the room with a calm, dangerous energy. "He wants you to show up at the gala," Killian asked. A dark, cold smile played on his lips, the kind of smile that usually meant someone was about to lose everything. Ivy nodded slowly, her eyes wide. "He says he'll hurt Jade and call the police if I'm not there." Killian reached out and brushed a stray hair from her face. "Fine, we will give him exactly what he wants. He wants a show, we'll give him one." His voice was as sharp as a blade. "But he isn't going to like the ending of this story." The charity gala was filled with the most powerful people in the city. The room sparkled with diamond necklaces and expensive suits, but the air felt heavy with gossip. Chad Miller stood right in the center of the crowd, looking smug and confident. He held a glass of champagne and spoke loudly to a group of investors, his voice full of fake sadness. He was telling them all how his unstable girlfriend had run away after stealing his family's priceless jewelry. He kept glancing at the entrance, waiting for Ivy to walk through the door, broken and begging for his forgiveness. Suddenly, the music seemed to fade, and the entire room went silent. The heavy oak doors at the front of the hall swung open with a loud thud. Every head turned at once. Ivy walked in, but she didn't look like a girl who was hiding or afraid. She was wearing a gown of pure, shimmering gold that caught every light in the room. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she held her head high, looking like a literal goddess who had stepped out of a painting. But what truly shocked the crowd was the man by her side. On her arm was Killian Blackwood. The gasps were audible, rippling through the room like a wave. No one had ever seen the Shadow King at a public party, let alone escorting a woman. Chad's face went from a smug grin to a ghostly, pale white in a matter of seconds. His hands shook, nearly dropping his glass. He tried to step forward, his face turning a dark, angry red as he realized he was losing his grip on the situation. "Ivy, get over here right now," Chad shouted, his voice cracking. He tried to sound like he was still in control, but his eyes were wide with panic. "You belong to me." Killian didn't hesitate. He took a single, calm step in front of Ivy, his massive height completely dwarfing Chad. He looked down at the younger man, with a gaze that was colder than the winter rain. "You must be the boy who doesn't know how to say goodbye," Killian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was so deep and steady that it echoed against the high ceilings of the silent hall. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew that Chad Miller was no longer the one in charge. Chad laughed, though the sound was thin and his voice shook with a nervous energy. He looked around the room, trying to find his courage in the eyes of the wealthy guests. "Do you even know who I am?" he sneered, pointing a trembling finger at Killian. "I am a Miller. My family has more money than God. I could buy this entire hotel and everyone inside it if I wanted to." He turned his gaze toward Ivy, and his eyes filled with pure hate. The mask of the perfect gentleman had finally cracked, revealing the monster underneath. You really think this guy cares about you, Ivy? You're just a toy to him. He's a criminal, a common thug, and I have the proof right here to send him away for life." With a triumphant look, Chad pulled a thick folder from his jacket. He held it up like a trophy, ready to hand over Killian's secret business deals to the group of police officers standing near the back of the hall. He thought he finally had the winning card. He thought he was about to watch Killian Blackwood fall. But Killian didn't look worried at all. He didn't even blink. Instead, he simply nodded toward the crowd. Williams stepped forward smoothly, appearing as if he had been part of the shadows all along. He wasn't holding a folder. He was holding a slim, glowing tablet. "Actually, Mr. Miller," Williams said, his voice calm and professional, "while you were so busy spending your family's fortune looking for Ivy, we were busy looking at something much more interesting. We took a very close look at your personal taxes and your family's bank accounts." Williams tapped the screen, and several large monitors around the gala room flickered to life, showing bank statements and signed checks. "It seems you've been stealing millions from your own father's company for years," Williams continued. "And you weren't just spending it on suits. You were using it to pay off massive gambling debts to some very dangerous people." The room erupted into low murmurs and shocked whispers. People pulled away from Chad as if he were suddenly poisonous. Chad's eyes went wide, his face turning from red to a sickly shade of gray. He spun around, looking desperately at the police officers for help. But the officers weren't looking at Killian anymore. They were moving toward Chad, their handcuffs clicking open in the quiet room. The predator had finally become the prey. The humiliation was total. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop as the truth about Chad's crimes flashed on the screens for everyone to see. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and an older man with gray hair and a face like granite stepped forward. It was Chad's father. He didn't look at the police or the guests. He looked at his son with pure disgust. "You are finished, Chad," his father said, his voice cold and cutting. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away on lies and greed. Do not look to me for help. You are no longer a Miller." As the police moved in to click the handcuffs around his wrists, Chad finally snapped. His face twisted into a mask of pure madness. He let out a loud, jagged scream and lunged at Ivy, his fingers reaching for her throat like claws. "If I can't have you, no one will," he yelled, his voice cracking with rage. Killian moved faster than anyone in the room could see. Before Chad could even get close to Ivy, Killian was there. He caught Chad by the throat with one powerful hand and slammed him back against the marble wall. The sound of the impact echoed through the silent hall. Killian's eyes were no longer calm. They were filled with a cold, dark fire that made even the toughest men in the room look away. He leaned in close, pinning Chad against the cold stone so his feet barely touched the floor. "I told you once," Killian whispered, his voice a low, terrifying growl that only Chad could hear. "I don't let go of what is mine. You are a small, weak boy playing a man's game. If you ever say her name again or even think about her, you won't live long enough to regret it. Do you understand?" Chad could only gasp for air, his eyes bulging with terror. Killian stared at him for one more second before opening his hand and dropping Chad to the floor like a piece of worthless trash. The police quickly grabbed Chad and dragged him out of the gala, his frantic screams fading into the distance. The room remained still, everyone staring at the man who had just ended a dynasty with a single look. Ivy didn't hesitate. She walked over to Killian and reached out, taking his large, scarred hand in hers. She felt the tension in his muscles slowly melt away at her touch. She wasn't afraid of the monster anymore. She was proud of the man who had stood in the dark to bring her into the light. 6 months later, the world was a completely different place. The heavy clouds that had once followed Ivy everywhere had finally cleared. Chad Miller was behind bars in a cold prison cell, his family name ruined and his power gone forever. He was no longer a predator, he was just a number. Jade was safe now, too. Instead of living in fear, she spent her days helping manage Ivy's brand new art gallery, where the walls were covered in the bright colors Ivy had once been too afraid to show the world. But the biggest change of all was at the Blackwood estate. The massive house no longer felt like a cold fortress or a hiding place. It felt like a home. Ivy stood on the high stone balcony, watching the orange and purple colors of the sunset paint the sky. She felt a pair of very strong, familiar arms wrap around her waist from behind. Killian pressed a soft, warm kiss to her shoulder, his breath tickling her skin. "What are you thinking about, my queen?" he asked in that deep, smooth voice she loved. Ivy turned around in his arms, smiling up at the man the whole world feared. "I am thinking about that cold night in the rain," she said softly. "I am thinking about how a desperate, fake kiss turned into my real, beautiful life." Killian pulled her even closer, his grip tightening just like it had on that very first night. "I told you then, Ivy," he said, his dark eyes now soft and full of a love he had never shown anyone else. "I am never letting go." He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was slow and sweet, tasting of the expensive wine they had shared at dinner. Killian led her inside to their large, candle-lit bedroom, where the air was thick with romance. He had never known such happiness in his 42 years. As he gently laid her down on the silk sheets, his hands traced every inch of her skin with a deep, hungry passion. Their love was a fire that burned brighter than any city light. As they moved together in a rhythmic motion in the quiet room, the pleasure was overwhelming and new. Ivy let out a loud, breathless moan that echoed through the halls of the mansion. For a man who used to live in silence, those sounds were the most beautiful music Killian had ever heard. In the silence of the sunset, Ivy finally knew what it felt like to be truly free. She wasn't running anymore. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Living well is the best revenge, but marrying his rival is even better. Did you enjoy seeing the ex-fiancé lose everything? Don't miss out on the next spicy update. Hit the like button and comment yes to get a notification for the next story.